Claire Thompson never expected her quiet life to change that spring. Her days followed the same rhythm: early mornings with coffee by the kitchen window, long afternoons spent alone, and evenings waiting for her husband, Mark, to come home. Mark worked long hours managing a construction company, often returning tired, talking about projects, deadlines, and workers. Claire had grown used to the silence of their large suburban house in Seattle. It wasn't unhappy silence, just empty, like a room with furniture, but no laughter, one Wednesday afternoon. While Claire was trimming the flowers in her garden, her phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was rushed but hopeful. "Honey, listen," he said. "Ethan is moving here for college. He's looking for a place to stay for a few weeks. Can he stay with us? Just until he finds something." Claire hesitated. She remembered Ethan, Mark's nephew, as a shy teenager who barely spoke at family gatherings. "Of course," she replied after a pause. "It'll be nice to have someone around." Mark sounded relieved. "Thanks, sweetheart. He's a good kid. You'll like him." That weekend, Ethan arrived with 2 bags, a backpack, and a quiet smile. He looked older than Claire remembered. He was tall now, with soft brown hair and a calm voice. His eyes carried a kind of gentleness that felt older than his years. "Thank you for letting me stay, Aunt Claire," he said, polite and slightly nervous. Claire welcomed him warmly, showing him the guest room upstairs. "You'll be comfortable here," she said. "Make yourself at home." Ethan nodded, grateful, and within a few days he blended easily into the rhythm of the house. He helped with dishes, offered to mow the lawn, and often joined Claire for dinner when Mark worked late. His presence added a quiet warmth to the house, something Claire hadn't realized she was missing in the evenings. When rain tapped softly on the windows, Claire and Ethan would sit in the living room watching movies or talking about music and books. Ethan had a thoughtful way of listening that surprised her. He asked questions, not just polite ones, but genuine ones that made her feel heard. When she mentioned how she used to paint years ago, his eyes lit up. "You should start again," he said. "You talk about it like it still matters to you." Claire laughed lightly. "Maybe I will." But later that night, she found herself staring at her old paints in the closet. She hadn't touched them in years, yet something about Ethan's encouragement stayed with her. Over time, she noticed subtle things: the way Ethan looked at her when she spoke, or how his tone softened when they talked alone. It wasn't disrespectful. It was quiet admiration, unspoken, but real. At first, Claire brushed it off, telling herself she was imagining it. But deep down, she knew that something in the air between them had changed. One evening, while Mark was away for a 3-day business trip, Claire made dinner, pasta, and garlic bread. She and Ethan ate together at the small dining table. The light from the chandelier cast a soft glow over the room. They talked about college life, Mark's family, and small things that didn't matter much but felt strangely meaningful. When Ethan thanked her for dinner, smile lingered a little longer than usual. Claire felt her heart skip. She quickly stood to clear the table, trying to steady herself. "You're very polite," she said, forcing a small laugh. "Mark would be proud." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're easy to be polite to, Aunt Claire." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay beside her husband's empty side of the bed, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't thinking of anything wrong, just this strange warmth she'd felt earlier. The way her heart had responded to kindness. She missed that feeling, being noticed, being seen. It wasn't about Ethan specifically. It was about what his presence reminded her of: youth, connection, and the tenderness that had slowly faded from her marriage. The next day, she decided to distract herself with chores. But Ethan's voice kept echoing in her mind, gentle, curious, full of life. That afternoon, he found her in the backyard. "You look thoughtful," he said. Claire smiled politely. "Just tired, that's all." He offered to help her with the garden, and they spent an hour working side by side, quietly, comfortably, as the sun began to set. Ethan turned to her. "You and Uncle Mark have been together for a long time, right?" Claire nodded. "Almost 15 years. "That's a long time," Ethan said softly. "You must really love him." Claire looked at the sky for a moment before answering. I do. But love isn't always exciting. Sometimes it's just quiet. Like this. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Quiet can be nice too. That night, while making tea, Claire caught her reflection in the kitchen window. She saw herself differently, not just as someone's wife, but as a woman who still had feelings, hopes, and parts of herself she'd forgotten. It wasn't about attraction. It was about remembering that she could still feel alive. As days passed, Claire noticed that the house no longer felt empty. When Ethan laughed, the rooms echoed with warmth. When he played music while cooking, the silence vanished. Mark, meanwhile, remained buried in work. He called occasionally, always too busy to talk for long. Claire didn't blame him, life had simply grown routine. But part of her couldn't help comparing the quiet care Ethan showed to the hurried affection she received from her. Husband. One rainy Friday night. After Mark called to say he'd be gone another week, Claire sat by the fireplace with a book. Ethan joined her, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. You shouldn't be alone on a night like this, he said, handing her a cup. Claire smiled, surprised by the thoughtfulness. You're too kind. For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the rain. Then Ethan said softly, I'm really glad I came here. You make this house feel like home. Claire's heart tightened. She looked at him, searching for the right words. That's sweet of you, Ethan. I'm glad you feel that way. But later that night, as she lay in bed, his words wouldn't leave her mind. You make this house feel like home. Simple words, yet they carried something deeper. Claire turned off the lamp and stared into the darkness. She told herself it was nothing, just kindness from a young man far from home. But the truth was more complicated. Ethan had reminded her of something she hadn't felt in years, the quiet joy of being appreciated, of being noticed not for what she did, but for who she was. The next morning, she decided to set boundaries, though she didn't quite know how. She told herself to keep things light, friendly, and distant. But as she walked downstairs and saw Ethan making breakfast, humming softly, she realized that some feelings couldn't simply be turned off. Claire didn't know where this story was heading, but deep inside, she sensed that what had begun as kindness was turning into something far more fragile, something that could either heal her heart or quietly break it. And that realization scared her more than she wanted to admit. The weeks that followed were quiet but different. Claire tried to convince herself that nothing had changed, that the warm glances and quiet moments between her and Ethan were harmless. Yet deep down she knew things had shifted in ways she couldn't explain. The air felt heavier when they were alone. Yes, she found herself noticing every small thing. His laughter, his kindness, the way he always asked if she needed help. It wasn't love, not really, but something tender that scared her. Mark was away more often now. His projects had expanded and he traveled from city to city chasing contracts. Claire was proud of him, but his absence stretched into long evenings filled with silence. Ethan tried to fill that space in gentle ways, helping her carry groceries, cooking dinner when she looked tired, leaving little notes on the counter that said, "Have a good day." One rainy evening, when Mark was out of town again, the house felt unusually still. Claire lit candles and played soft jazz on the old record player. The storm outside made the world seem far away. Ethan walked in, holding a blanket. "You might get cold," he said, draping it gently over the arm of the couch. She smiled. "You're thoughtful, Ethan. Thank you." They sat watching an old black and white movie, the kind Claire loved. The light from the screen flickered across their faces, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. When thunder rumbled outside, the power flickered and went out. For a few seconds, the room was dark. Ethan reached for his phone, turning on the flashlight, then lit a few candles from the shelf. The warm light painted the room in golden shadow. Claire glanced at him, his face calm in the candlelight. "You handle things well," she said quietly. Ethan smiled. "You make it easy to feel calm here." Something about the way he said it made her heart beat faster. She turned her gaze back to the window, pretending to focus on the rain. For a while they sat listening to the storm. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice low but steady. "Can I tell you something?" Claire nodded, unsure what to expect. I didn't know what to think when Uncle Mark said I'd stay here. I was nervous. But now, I'm glad I did. You've been so kind to me. It feels peaceful here." Claire smiled, though something about his words made her uneasy. "I'm happy you feel that way," she said softly. "College can be hard. You need a place to rest your mind." Ethan nodded but didn't say anything else. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Yet it carried weight, something unspoken that lingered in the air. When the lights came back, Claire stood up quickly, blowing out the candles. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh, "at least the storm didn't last." Ethan smiled faintly, but his eyes held hers for a second too long. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the rain outside her window, her mind filled with confusion. It wasn't attraction she felt. It was connection, warmth, a kind of attention she hadn't experienced in years. She loved her husband deeply, but their marriage had become quiet, predictable, and routine. Ethan's presence had stirred something human in her, a reminder that she could still feel something beyond habit. The next morning, she decided she needed distance. She began keeping her time structured, more errands, more painting, fewer shared meals. Ethan seemed to notice. He didn't question her but became more reserved, respectful. The easy conversations faded into short exchanges. She told herself it was for the best. Yet her chest ached with an emptiness she didn't want to name. A few days later, Mark called. "How's Ethan settling in?" he asked between work calls. "He's doing fine," Claire said, trying to sound normal. "He's quiet, focused on school." Mark laughed. "That's good. He's a smart kid. Thanks for helping him out." After the call ended, Claire stared at the phone for a long moment, guilt pressing on her heart. She hadn't done anything wrong, but her emotions were tangled in ways she didn't understand. That evening, Ethan returned from class looking tired. "Rough day?" Claire asked. "A bit," he said, setting down his bag. "Sometimes it feels like everyone's moving faster than I can keep up." She smiled softly. "That's just how life feels at your age. You'll catch up." They ate dinner together in silence, the sound of the clock filling the room. When he finished, Ethan looked up and said, "You've been distant lately. Did I do something wrong?" Claire froze. "No, not at all. You've done nothing wrong." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I just don't want to make you uncomfortable." Her throat tightened. "You haven't. I just needed some space. Sometimes I overthink things." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand." But the sadness in his eyes made her heart twist. Later that night, while washing dishes, Claire found herself watching him through the window reflection as he studied at the table. He looked focused, peaceful. She suddenly felt a rush of protectiveness, like an older sister or a mentor. But beneath it, there was a faint trace of something more delicate. Something she didn't want to name. Days passed, and the quiet between them became familiar again. They still shared morning coffee, still talked about little things. But the conversations were careful now, like walking on soft ground after a storm. Claire told herself that this distance was good, that she had regained control. But sometimes, when she caught Ethan looking at her with that calm, thoughtful expression, she wasn't sure if control was what she really wanted. One Friday evening, Mark called to say he wouldn't be home for another week. Claire hung up the phone slowly. Ethan, who had been reading on the couch, noticed her expression. "Uncle Mark, again?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said. "He's always so busy. Must miss him," Ethan said quietly. Claire nodded, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "I do. But you learn to get used to things." For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said something that caught her off guard. "You shouldn't have to get used to being lonely." The words hit deeper than he knew. Claire looked away, blinking fast. "It's not loneliness," she said softly. "It's just life." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. That night, when she went to her room, she closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. The echo of Ethan's words wouldn't fade. You shouldn't have to get used to being lonely. She realized that for years she had mistaken silence for peace. But now, for the first time, she saw the difference. Still, Claire knew she couldn't let her emotions cross a line. Whatever warmth she felt for Ethan had to remain pure, an unspoken understanding that would fade with time. She couldn't risk her marriage, her integrity, or his future. So, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would protect him and herself from feelings that didn't belong. But as the rain fell outside and she lay awake, Claire couldn't shake the thought that sometimes doing the right thing came with its own kind of heartbreak. One that no one else would ever see, done, and somewhere in the quiet house. Ethan sat awake too, wondering if the distance he felt was truly what she wanted or just what she thought she had to choose. By the start of autumn, the tension between Claire and Ethan had grown into something quiet but undeniable. They still spoke kindly, still shared breakfast in the mornings. But beneath the politeness was a current of emotions neither could put into words. Claire felt it in the air, a kind of heaviness that came from things left unspoken. She wanted to keep things normal, yet every conversation seemed to dance around something fragile. One evening, while she was cleaning up after dinner, Ethan walked into the kitchen holding 2 cups of tea. "You've been quiet lately," he said gently. "Are you okay?" Claire smiled faintly. "Just tired. It's been a long week." He then set the cups down. "You work too hard, Aunt Claire. You never take a break." She laughed softly. "Someone has to keep this place in order." The warmth in his tone made her heart soften. It wasn't romantic, it was genuine care. But that care had started to feel too close. She knew they couldn't keep going like this, pretending the feelings in the room weren't growing. She took a deep breath, deciding that the time had come to talk, to put everything in the open before it turned into something that neither of them could undo. The next morning, when Mark left early for another out-of-town project, Claire found Ethan sitting on the porch, reading. The autumn breeze rustled the trees, scattering leaves across the yard. "Ethan," she said softly, walking toward him. "Can we talk?" He looked up, a bit nervous. "Sure." She sat beside him, her hands clasped together. "I think we both know things have been different lately," she began. "I care about you, and I think you care about me, too. But I need to be honest about what's happening." Ethan's expression changed. He looked down for a moment, then met her eyes. "I do care about you," he said. "Maybe more than I should. I didn't plan it, and I don't want to make things awkward, but it's true." His words were simple, sincere, and they hit her like a quiet storm. Claire felt her throat tighten. "Ethan, you're young," she said softly. "You're still figuring out who you are and what love means. What you feel, it's kind, but it's not what you think." Ethan shook his head. "I know how it sounds, but it's not just a crush. You listen. You notice things. You make people feel seen. That's rare." Her eyes softened with sadness. "That's very sweet, but it's dangerous to confuse kindness with something deeper. I'm your uncle's wife. You respect him, and I know you don't want to hurt him." Ethan nodded, his voice low. "I'd never hurt him. Or you." The silence that followed was long and full of emotion. The leaves kept falling, and the sound of a distant lawnmower filled the air. Claire finally spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "I think you need to take a step back, Ethan. Maybe it's time you looked for another place to stay. Not because I'm angry, but because I care about you enough to know this isn't fair to either of us." Ethan's face fell, but he didn't argue. "I understand," he said quietly. I wanted to tell you before leaving. I couldn't pretend anymore." Claire reached out and placed a hand on his. "And I'm proud of you for being honest. That takes courage. But sometimes love isn't about holding on, it's about knowing when to let go." His eyes glistened, but he smiled weakly. "You sound like something out of a book." She laughed softly. "Maybe, but I've lived long enough to know it's true." The next few days were quiet. Ethan started spending more time outside the house, studying at the library, meeting classmates, keeping himself busy. Claire noticed the change, and though it hurt to see him pull away, she knew it was necessary. Every time she passed his empty chair at dinner, she felt a small ache in her chest, the ache of doing the right thing when it didn't feel easy. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Ethan came home with a serious look on his face. He found Claire in the kitchen. "I found an apartment near campus," he said. "I'll move out by next week." Claire paused, then nodded. "That's good, Ethan. I think that's best for you." He hesitated, then added, "I don't want you to think I regret anything. You've been like the person who reminded me what real kindness looks like." Claire felt her eyes sting. "And you reminded me that it still matters. Being seen, being understood. But Ethan, what you're feeling now will change with time. You'll meet someone your age, someone who fits your world." He nodded. "I know, but I'll always be grateful to you." Fa, the moment felt heavier than words could carry. She wanted to hug him, to comfort him, but she didn't. Instead, she smiled softly. "Then promise me something, live your life fully. Don't hold on to things that were meant to teach you, not keep you." That night, after he went to bed, Claire sat alone in the living room. The candle flickered beside her as she thought about everything that had happened. It wasn't love she had felt for Ethan, but it was a reminder that her heart still had life in it, even after years of quiet. He had woken something inside her that had been sleeping, and though it brought confusion, it also brought clarity. She realized how much she had missed emotional connection, not just affection, but being truly known. She didn't blame Ethan for the feelings that had surfaced between them. He had been young, honest, and human. And she, too, was human, imperfect, but trying to do right. The next morning, Ethan joined her for breakfast. The tension had softened. He seemed lighter, as if speaking his truth had freed him. They talked about simple things, his new apartment, his classes, how he wanted to join the college photography club. Claire listened with pride. "You'll do great things, Ethan," she said. "You have a good heart." He smiled. "Because of people like you." When he left for class, Claire stood at the door, watching him walk down the driveway. The morning sun caught his hair, and she felt a strange peace settle inside her. She had faced the hard part, the moment where temptation met choice, and she had chosen the right path. That night, Mark called from his hotel. "How's everything at home?" he asked. "Quiet," Claire said. "Ethan's moving out soon. He found a place near campus." Mark sounded pleased. "That's great. I knew he'd get settled." After the call ended, Claire stood by the window, looking at the fading light. The house would soon return to its familiar silence, but she didn't feel lonely anymore. Instead, she felt grateful for what had been learned. For the emotional truth that had surfaced and passed without harm. Ethan had wanted something from her. Not love in the way he thought, but understanding, comfort, and care. And what she gave him was something deeper, the strength to move forward, to find real love in the right way. As the evening breeze moved through the curtains, Claire whispered to herself, "Sometimes, the hardest thing you can do for someone is the right thing." And with that thought, she turned off the lights and went to bed, her heart steady, her conscience clear, and her spirit calm for the first time in a long while. The house felt different after Ethan moved out. For the first few days, the quiet was heavy, not peaceful like before, but strangely hollow. Claire missed the sound of footsteps on the stairs, the clinking of mugs in the kitchen, and even the soft music he used to play while studying. It was strange how quickly someone could fill a space, and how quickly that same space could feel empty once they were gone. Mark returned home the weekend after Ethan left. He walked in with his usual smile, kissed Claire on the cheek, and started talking about work. He didn't notice the small changes, the missing chair from the porch, the absence of an extra coffee cup in the morning. "How's Ethan doing?" he asked while unpacking. Claire smiled gently. "He's good. Found a nice apartment near campus. He's settling in well." Mark nodded, pleased. "He's a smart kid. I'm proud of him." Claire nodded too, but her heart felt heavy in a quiet, unexplainable way. She didn't tell Mark everything. There was no reason to. Ethan hadn't done anything wrong, and neither had she. What had happened was emotional, complicated, but still clean. It was a lesson, not a mistake. As days passed, Claire began returning to her old routines. Gardening, painting, reading. Yet something inside her had changed. Ethan's presence had reminded her that love wasn't just about comfort or familiarity. It was about being seen, valued, and emotionally alive. She loved Mark deeply, but their marriage had become quiet and predictable. Now, she wanted to bring warmth back into it, not the thrill of youth, but the tenderness that had been lost. One evening, while cooking dinner, Claire found herself humming. Mark looked up from his laptop and smiled. "You seem happy," he said. Claire smiled back. "Just trying to feel like myself again." He reached for her hand briefly before returning to work. It wasn't much, but it was something. She decided then that maybe she could rebuild what had faded. Not by forcing change, but by gently bringing it back. Weeks later, a small letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. Ethan's, her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "Dear Aunt Claire, I wanted to say thank you. You probably don't realize how much you helped me. I learned more from you than you know. Not about love, but about strength, respect, and doing what's right. I understand things now that I didn't before. You showed me that caring for someone doesn't always mean keeping them close. Sometimes it means letting them go. I hope you and Uncle Mark are happy. I'll always be grateful." Claire read the letter twice, her eyes soft with emotion. It wasn't a love letter. It was a goodbye, the kind that brings peace instead of pain. She folded it carefully and placed it inside her journal. That chapter of her life was over, but it would always remain a quiet reminder of what it meant to be human, to feel deeply and still choose what was right. That evening, she went for a walk. The sunset stretched across the Seattle sky, painting the clouds in gold and pink. As she walked past the park, she saw a group of college students laughing near a coffee cart, and for a moment, one of them reminded her of Ethan. The same kindness in his eyes, the same lightness in his smile. She smiled to herself and kept walking. When she returned home, Mark was waiting on the porch, holding 2 cups of tea. "You were gone a while," he said. "I was thinking," she replied softly. "About what?" he asked. She looked at him and said, "About us. About how time changes things if we don't take care of them." Mark frowned slightly. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Claire said gently. "We just stopped noticing each other somewhere along the way. But I think we can find it again the way it used to feel." He looked at her, surprised but touched. "I'd like that," he said simply. That night, they sat on the porch together, talking more than they had in months. It wasn't dramatic or full of confessions, just 2 people reconnecting, one word at a time. Claire felt lighter. The guilt she'd carried quietly began to fade, replaced by a quiet gratitude. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window. Claire made breakfast while Mark read the newspaper, and for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel lonely. It wasn't the same kind of warmth Ethan had brought. It was steadier, calmer, rooted in years of shared life. As time passed, Claire and Mark began taking small trips together, drives to the countryside, visits to the farmer's market, dinners without phones or distractions. They started talking about things that mattered. Again, dreams, memories, even regrets. It wasn't perfect, but it was real every now and then. Claire thought of Ethan, not with longing, but with quiet respect. He had taught her something precious, that the heart doesn't stop feeling just because life settles into routine, and that the truest test of love isn't desire, but discipline. Months later, while cleaning her art room, Claire found one of Ethan's sketches. He had left it behind, tucked into a book on the shelf. It was a simple pencil drawing, the garden in the backyard with the morning light streaming through the trees. At the bottom, he had written one line: "Home is not a place. It's a feeling." She smiled and pinned it to her corkboard. It was a small piece of the past, a gentle reminder that sometimes people come into your life not to stay, but to help you rediscover yourself. That evening, when Mark came home, she showed him the sketch. "Ethan made this," she said. Mark admired it. "He's talented. You should frame it." And so she did. From that day on, whenever she passed the picture, she didn't feel sadness. She felt peace. Peace in knowing that what could have gone wrong had instead become something beautiful. She hadn't crossed any lines, hadn't let emotion destroy what mattered most. She had simply listened to her heart, then chosen wisdom over weakness. Years later, Claire would look back on that autumn and realize it had changed her, not because of what almost happened, but because of what didn't. The experience had reminded her that life is full of moments that test the heart, and that strength sometimes looks like silence, restraint. And Grace, Ethan's words in the letter stayed with her. Caring for someone doesn't always mean keeping them close. She carried that truth quietly, letting it guide her in ways she didn't always speak aloud. And so, the story that had begun with an unexpected guest ended not in regret, but in renewal. Claire had learned that love, real love, is not about holding on to every spark that passes through your life. It's about protecting the flames that truly matter. And that was exactly what she did.